Today I'm going to give you guys a little bit of advice when it comes to purchasing or looking to buy an E90, E92, E93 M3, or just a BMW E90 in general. This is kind of a combination of stuff that I've learned from the F chassis and then now going into an E90 M3 chassis. Just some things that you need to be aware of when you are looking to buy a car like this, kind of how much it would cost you to get into the car, what I paid, and things you can expect to come up when it comes to maintenance and the slow draining of your wallet. So before we get into anything, let's talk a little bit about the history of this car, me buying it, all of that. I bought this car about 5 months ago with just under 70,000 miles. The car now has 73,000 miles on it, and I paid $26,000 for the car. Now I do want to say that the car was really clean when I bought it. I think that I probably could have gone down like maybe $1,000 or $2,000 if I wanted to haggle with the guy. The guy was really firm on the price. He had another buyer interested. I knew that I was already emotionally invested in this car and I really wanted it. So I gave him the $26,000. I gave him the $26,000 for the car. I think it was just under $26,000. But for those of you who don't really know what this car is, it is a 2011 E90 M3. Unfortunately, DCT for those of you who are manual fans. Yes, I am missing that third pedal, but we seem to be getting along just fine with it. However, I have come to really enjoy the DCT transmission, especially after I upgraded to the PowerFlex motor mounts. It is much more comfortable to drive. It's not as jerky. That's a common thing that people complain about with the DCTs, is that there's a lot of jerkiness in the car, and once you upgrade those motor mounts, it basically remedies that issue. So, being a 2011, that means this is the upgraded LCI version of the car, and it also means that they stopped using the copper rod bearings in this car and they started using the aluminum rod bearings. The S65 is obviously notorious for having the rod bearing failure. And this was more so of an issue on the pre-LCI models when they had the copper rod bearings. However, it is still an issue even if you have the aluminum rod bearings in this car. We went ahead and just replaced the rod bearings with VAC rod bearings as well as ARP forged bolts. There are a bunch of different ways that you can go about that. You can do the BEs, you can do the ARPs, you can do the ACLs. A lot of people use different rod bearings, but the most important thing is just make sure that you get them done because you will have to do that. So that leads me to my first point. And overall, just good rule of thumb when buying a new car in general, service records. Make sure that you get all of these service records for this car or your new car that you're looking at that you can actually get a hold of. You may not be able to get all of them, but just do a lot of research on your car, look up the history, talk to the owner, talk to the previous owner, see what they have for you. Luckily, the previous owner of this car had everything on paper, and I've actually started putting a binder together of everything that I do to this car, all of the maintenance, and I keep everything in paper form in a binder for this car. Because there is something to be said when you are selling the car and you have all of those maintenance records right there in paper form. It makes the buyer feel much more comfortable. So you as a buyer, you should make sure that you try and get as many service records as possible, which means hopefully they've done the rod bearings. The other big one are the throttle actuators in this car. Now, the reason that I went for the $26,000 was because he had already done the throttle actuators. In fact, he had just done brakes, he did throttle actuators, spark plugs, and also some of the belts. So he had taken care of pretty much all the maintenance that I needed to do, except for the rod bearings, so I kind of budgeted for that and went ahead and bought the car at $26,000. So let's talk about some of the things that you guys want to look out for when you're buying a car. Obviously, with the used car, you're gonna have more issues, so you wanna make sure that you check the outside condition. Just do a thorough walk around. If you guys are buying the car sight unseen, which I highly do not recommend you do, always make sure that you look at the car or send someone that you trust to go look at the car and make sure that the car is actually as advertised, because a lot of dealerships will lie to you. They will tell you, oh yeah, the car's super clean, no one ever smoked in it, and I have numerous stories of people, just horror stories, of that actually not working out. So the first thing that I do, walk around. What does the body look like? Are all of the gaps in the body trim even? Does it look like anything has been moved? is the paint damaged at all? That will tell you a lot about how the car was maintained. And if the body is in bad condition, you can assume that the engine is probably also going to be in bad condition, because if they didn't take care of the outside, they probably did not take care of the inside. The overall exterior condition of a car will tell you a lot about how the owner treated the car in general. If it was not treated well, I can guarantee you that they were beating the heck out of the car and probably didn't do all the maintenance that they needed to do. So my car was overall relatively clean. I am rather OCD and over the top when it comes to cars, so by my standards, it wasn't perfect, but I didn't expect it to be perfect. I knew that it was gonna be a little bit of a project to kind of bring it up to the point where I was happy with it, which is right now. It's absolutely flawless right now. So after you do your walk around, you make sure that you look at the car, the exterior, everything looks good. Always make sure that you look at the wheels. Do you have any curbing? Are there any kind of dents that you see in there? Are there any kind of chunks out of the tires? These are also going to be important, because if someone hit the car hard enough against a curb to where something is bent, or there's a chunk out of a tire, or the wheel is just super curb rashed, there can also be issues with suspension or control arms or axles, things like that. You want to make sure that you're looking around at the wheels, because that will tell you a lot more about what could possibly be happening behind the wheels. In addition to the actual tires and wheels, you want to look at the tire tread. Tires are not cheap for this car. These are 295s on the back and these are 265s on the front. So tires in general for the M3 are not cheap. You're spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars just per tire. So you want to make sure that you have some tread on the tires. And if they are super worn down, just make sure that you work that into your price, or you budget for it and prepare to actually have to buy new tires, because it's inevitable. You will have to buy new tires at some point. Another common one that I see, people are often missing the tow hook covers. Make sure that the bumper has the tow hook cover, or that it's not damaged. I see this all the time. A lot of times what happens is people buy them without the tow hook covers, and then they buy replacements and they never fit as well as the original. This happened to me on my F30, and I ended up having to use a little bit of glue to actually just get it to sit in there properly. So just make sure that you pay attention to that. And also, if that's off of there, it's likely that the car was towed at some point, and that's something that you want to look into. Why was the car towed? What happened? That goes along lines with the service records. Always make sure that you're asking the previous owner for Carfax, and make sure that you ask them, have there been any major issues or issues at all? Has it ever been in an accident? A lot of times people will get into fender benders and they won't report them, so they don't show up on the actual Carfax. You just need to be looking out for a lot of these things. If there was an accident, you may be able to tell from any kind of overspray from paint or body line gaps. Body line gaps are really going to be the telltale sign of something that has been replaced on the car. So always just make sure that you're looking at your gaps. Has anything been replaced or moved or just modified at all? And if there is something that has been changed, that should raise a red flag, and you should investigate a little more on it. Also, you guys make sure that you drive the car. Is there anything that feels weird in the suspension? Any kind of clunks or noises or jerkiness? Does the wheel vibrate at all? Is there any kind of strange vibration coming from the actual suspension or tires or wheels? That will also tell you a lot about the condition of the actual vehicle. So now we'll talk a little bit about how lucky I was when I bought this car. I didn't get a pre-purchase inspection. That's a terrible idea. Never, ever do that. Do not pass up on a pre-purchase inspection. Make sure you take the car to a shop that you trust and have them do the pre-purchase inspection. It's not that expensive. It's like $100, $150, but it's totally worth it, because you could end up with a total lemon because you weren't able to see underneath the car. Even though it looks clean up top, you have no idea what's happening underneath the car. Make sure that you have a shop that knows what they're doing, check out the car, and advise you how much is wrong with it or how much money it would take to kind of bring it up to standards. There's a lot of variables when it goes into buying a new car, and let's be honest, it's not cheap. So you guys need to protect your investments and make sure that you have someone, a shop that you trust, check it out for you. I recently, short story, almost bought a supercharged E9X M3, and I ended up not buying it because it was trashed on the bottom side. It had leaks everywhere. There were zip ties underneath the car, and I was on the verge of buying the car because it was so clean outside and on the interior. Once we put it up on the lift, I knew right away that that was not the car for me. Just because it looks clean on the outside does not mean that it's a good car for you. Make sure that you get a pre-purchase inspection. I cannot tell you that enough. I got really lucky with this car when I bought it. So the reason that I'm bringing a lot of this stuff up is because on an M3, you guys, everything is expensive. You may or may not know this already, but all of the parts, even the OEM parts that you have to replace, are just super expensive. Small trims, tiny little bolts, everything is expensive. So if you are looking for like a budget car, this is probably not the car for you. Maybe get started with like a basic 3 Series or even like an F30. Those are much cheaper than the E90 M3s, and just this engine in general, it's a lot to maintain. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of oil, it drinks a lot of fuel, so it is not a cheap car to own. And this is a question that I get asked a lot. Is it an expensive car to own? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is an expensive car to own. However, if you take care up front of all the maintenance and you continually take care of the car and you kind of know what to look out for, it will not be that bad. But if you are daily driving the car and you're daily driving it long distances, this car is going to be expensive. The gas that this thing drinks is unreal. My car gets like 15 to 18 miles per gallon, depending on how I'm driving or where I'm driving, and that is not very good. Whereas the F30 was getting close to 24 to like 28 miles per gallon. So with that being said, just make sure you know what you're getting into. And if you're someone that can just barely afford like the payments on it, I would not advise getting this car. Maybe wait until you have a little bit more income. I always say that if you can't buy it twice, you can't afford it. That is something that I've always lived by. If you cannot buy it twice, you personally should not be purchasing it. All right, so we talked a little bit about the rod bearings and the throttle actuators. Those are the two big ones that you are going to have to replace at some point anyways. Let's just put a ballpark figure of $5,000 for all that. So you want a budget, it's going to be expensive, it is surgery. Make sure that you budget for those, because it's going to happen. If the car did not have those replaced yet, it is inevitably going to happen to you and you will want to do them. They say about 50 to 80,000 miles for the rod bearings, somewhere in there. I replaced mine at 73K, literally just had them done last week, but the peace of mind, I feel so much better knowing that I did them, and now I can have a little more fun with the car, start putting intakes on, exhaust, all that performance stuff. So the next thing that I'm gonna point out to you guys is make sure that you're looking around the oil filler cap. This engine is really well known for sweating and leaking underneath this oil filler cap. You'll see oil drip down all around here. This is an issue that I actually had when I first bought that car. I'm gonna link the fix right here. Basically, I used an E9X M3 oil filler cap, and that solved my issue. We also had to do a little bit of sanding down on the valve cover spout area to make sure it was a clean contact. And once we put that E9X M3 filler cap on there, we were good to go. Other things that you need to look for: valve cover gaskets on each side. You want to make sure that those valve cover gaskets are not leaking, they're not sweating, there's no bubbling around here on the valve cover. These are all telltale signs of maintenance that has not been taken care of. Try and take a look at the belts. Do they look old, frayed? What kind of condition are those actually in? On mine, I knew that the previous owner had already replaced the belt, so I was in good condition there. But overall, this car looked really clean when I bought it. I kind of knew that this was the right one based on how it drove and just the overall cleanliness and how neat and prepared the seller was with all of the documentation and everything. It was legit, and I knew that I was getting a car that had been taken care of really well. So you also want to make sure that your blinker fluid, yeah, your blinker fluid is filled. I'm just playing, you guys, I'm sorry. You know I had to do that. It's a BMW, I had to throw that in there. So the other thing that I'll point out with this car, the electronics. There's a lot of electronics in this car, and things can kind of short out and get weird and go bad. For example, something with my car, when I first got it, I was having some electrical issues with like the Bluetooth and stuff. I have since fixed it, but I actually ended up replacing the entire FRM module in this car because mine was faulty, and the way that I found that out was using Beamer code. I tried to code some things and it told me that my FRM was faulty, so I ended up buying a new one. It was actually something that should have been warrantied by BMW, but they denied my warranty. I ended up just going in out of pocket. It was like $500 or something to buy the actual FRM and get it replaced. Now I'm able to code everything and the car functions perfectly, so I think that a lot of the little tiny weird electrical issues I was having was because of that FRM. I think it's also a good call to just take a look at the fans, make sure none of the blades are cracked, just the plastic in general. Take a good look at it, make sure there's no cracking, Make sure that nothing looks like it's been moved around or misplaced in the engine bay. When it comes to the interior, make sure that you obviously look at the leather. What kind of condition is everything in? That will tell you a lot about how well the car has been maintained. If you have nav, is the nav working properly? Is the Bluetooth working properly? These are all things that you just kind of obviously want to look into when you're buying the car. The next thing, look at the battery. You want to make sure that the battery is not older than 5 or 6 years. They do say like 4 years, but make sure it's not older than 5 or 6 years. I actually just replaced mine. In fact, the battery in this car was 10 years old. I was having a discharge battery malfunction in the car. We knew right away that the battery was needing a replacement. Turns out that that battery was over 10 years old, which is crazy. Do not wait 10 years to replace your battery. You definitely need to do that within 5 or 6 years. The way to actually tell how old the battery is there's actually a number, 2 numbers on the battery terminal, and that will tell you how old the battery actually is. Next thing that I like to have, the original manual. Is all of the documentation, the original documentation and manual in the car. I prefer to have that. Do you have to? Maybe not, but I think it's a good rule of thumb to always make sure that the manual is in fact with the car and all of the original paperwork is in there. So these are all things that you kind of have to do on the outside, just like looking at the car. This is why I say it's really important to get a pre-purchase inspection, because you can't see obviously underneath the car without actually getting the car onto a lift and having some professionals look at it. You guys make sure that you get a pre-purchase inspection. Super, super important when it comes to buying a new car. You want to make sure that you are protecting your investment. All right, I think that that pretty much sums it up. I will say that with all of that being said, this car has been my favorite car to own to date, and I've had a lot of different cars. I've owned a couple of different BMWs, and by far, this car, it just has a soul, and I absolutely love the way that it sounds. The way that it drives. I think that this is going to be one of the most iconic BMWs ever built. I also think that in a few years we're going to start seeing these cars hold their value a little more. The price of which you pay is a little bit subjective and debatable. I've seen them go for as low as like $15,000 all the way up to $40,000. It just depends on the mileage and the condition of the overall car and where it's being sold. If we were to put a list together of everything that I personally have already taken care of on this car, we have done the rod bearings, the throttle actuators were done before me, we have done the valve cover gaskets, the fuel breather valve, which is a pretty common one that people run into, all of the fluid flushes, all of the, obviously the oil changes, spark plugs, and then in addition to that, we did the motor mounts, and I upgraded from the OEM motor mounts to the PowerFlex motor mounts, which I absolutely love in this car. It makes such a big difference. But overall, you guys, I've absolutely enjoyed owning this car so far. We're just now getting into some of the modifying, and it's such a blast. It's such a unique car to own. If you have the opportunity to drive one, make sure you take the person up on that opportunity. It's just such, I can't say it enough, it's such a cool car. Anyways, this is answering a lot of the questions that you guys sent me on Instagram and in YouTube, what to look out for, what you should pay. Hopefully this answered some of those questions. If you guys have anything to add, comment down below. Let's build up the comment section and help people out, answer any questions. Maybe I missed something that you should look out for on this car. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please make sure you subscribe if you're new here, comment down below, like this video, hit that bell notification. Just like that, this video's over, and I'm out.